Hello YouTube, this is umills03. So we're now at lesson 5 of my Java tutorial where I'm conveying my understanding of Java programming concepts to my YouTube community. So we've already talked about how to download an integrated development environment, a software program called BlueJ in order to be able to write Java code. So that's in my lesson 0. We've already talked about printing statements, already talked about comments, arithmetic expressions, variables, the difference between ints and doubles, how to convert between them, modular arithmetic, order of operations. We talked about the difference between declaring a variable and initializing a variable. We talked about initializing multiple variables on the same line as long as they're the same data type. We talked about switching the values of two variables, rounding a floating point number to the nearest integer, and also quickly changing the value of variables. So for example, if you say something like x divided by equals 2, it would take the original value of x, divide it by 2, and reassign that result to x. So now what we're going to do is, instead of talking about ints and doubles, we're going to talk a little bit more about strings. So string is basically an object. It's a class type in Java, and it represents an array of characters. So we're going to be talking about characters in an upcoming video. So this is lesson 5, and I'm going to commit about 2 lessons to talk about string objects and string methods. And so remember, so strings are basically it's variables for words, sentences, letters, characters, things like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a string object in Java, and we're going to print its value. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say string A equals pizza. And so I can just put that in double quotations. And then if I say system.out.println of A, you should be able to predict the output here. So A here, this is a declaration and initialization. So we talked about this in the previous video. Declaration and initialization of a string object. So not only does it say, hey Java, I want you to keep track of a string object called A, but it also says, and I want you to have the first string that A refers to be pizza, which turns out to be umills03's favorite food, and hopefully yours as well, if you're not a weirdo. So now what we're going to do is press compile, and then we're going to press close. And then, of course, certainly remember, we go ahead and right-click on our class and press void main string args, and then OK, and then we get pizza. So this is an example of printing the result of a string variable, So string object we use for sentences and words, and we can put them in double quotes. When we have the plus sign with arithmetic, so if we say 8 plus 2, that's taken as adding 2 numbers together, right? So if you say 8 plus 2, you should get 10. But what if you say something like pine plus apple? So here you see this plus sign here, but this is not an addition. This is a fancy word called concatenation. So I'm going to write that in a comment with 2 forward slashes. So concatenation is a very fancy word. It's like unnecessarily fancy, but it means combining 2 string objects. So combining 2 strings. So it takes this string P-I-N-E and combines it with A-P-P-L-E. And then we would get P-I-N-E-A-P-P-L-E, which spells a word called pineapple. And so that's a delicious fruit. And so this is called concatenation, okay? So we're going to talk about different methods. We're going to talk about different methods or functions. So there's different things you can do with string objects, and those are called methods. So what I would recommend you do now, you can pull this up, and you want to go to basically string Java API. So this is something that you can Google. So string Java API. So Java basically has documentation for some different methods and functionality that they provide. So it says that the string class represents character strings, so basically arrays of characters. And it's talking about basically words and letters and things like that. So, ABC, and you can see different things like that. And if you scroll down, there's all kinds of methods. There's all kinds of different things that you can do with string objects. There's probably it's hard to see how many are in this list right now, but probably like 70 or 50 or 80 or something like that. And we're going to learn about 12 of them. So I want to teach you about 6 or 7 or 8 of them in this video. And then in lesson 6, I'm going to teach you another 6 or 7 or 8, because the string class in Java is pretty important. And you understanding how to work with words and paragraphs and sentences and letters and expressions of that type is going to be important, and it's worth taking 2 lessons to talk about it. So the first lesson we're going to talk about is the length method. So if you call a length method on a string object, it returns the number of characters in the string. So let me show you what I mean by that. So what you're going to do is you're going to say string r equals rocket, and then you're going to say system.out.println of r.length. And so what this does, if you call the .length method with these empty parentheses on a string object, it'll tell you the number of characters in that string. So there are 6 letters in the word rocket, and so that's what we expect when we run the code output. And you can see that's what shows up here is a 6. So that's what's going on here. And you can assign that to a variable too. So you could have said int s equals r.length, and then you could have said system.out.println of s mod 3. Okay, so this says if I divide the number of letters in the word rocket by 3, what is the remainder? And we would be expecting 0. So this is a little bit of a review from the previous video of what this modular expression does, right? So now we understand that. We said that the plus sign can be used to concatenate or combine 2 strings together, but there's also a concat method. So basically what you do, so we're going to write a little, so given 2 strings A and B, so A plus B returns a string with A concatenated to or combined with B. Another way to do that, A.concat of B has the same effect. A.concat of B. It's just a method. It's a way of doing the same thing. So if you said something like, string X equals butter and string Y equals fly. And then, so what if you said string Z equals x.concat of Y, and then you try printing Z. So then this should hopefully print butterfly, okay? And that this has the same effect as if you had written string Z equals x plus Y. It's the exact same thing, x.concat of Y. So if you combine butter with fly, you should get an animal called a butterfly, and so that's what we end up seeing here, so butterfly. So concat and length. So now you have 2 methods at your disposal. So remember, in order to use this concat method, you call it on a string object, and then when you call it, you do one string object dot concat of whatever string object you want to combine it with, right? So you operate on one string object, but then you have to feed in the, another string object being, whatever you want to append onto the first one. What about the isEmpty method? So the isEmpty method will return true if and only if the length of the string is 0. So if you have an empty string, string s equals an empty string. So you can see a double quote, and so here this is an empty string. So you say system.out.println of s.length, and so obviously we would expect 0 here. And if you say s.isEmpty, and then we would expect true here. Now what we're going to do is we're going to say we're going to reassign s to a new string where we take the original s, which is an empty string, and we're going to combine the empty string with the word potato. And so if you combine an empty string with the word potato, what do you get? You get potato. And so now if we print the length of this, it should not be 0, it should be 6. And now if we see if this is an empty string, it should no longer be an empty string because we've combined it with actual characters. So this should return false. So it should say 0, true, 6, false. And now if we run the code, that's exactly what we see here. So now you're familiar with the isEmpty method, the length method, and the concat method. Now we can talk about the toUpperCase method and the toLowerCase method. You can probably guess at what these do. So if you say something like string A equals Austin, and then you say string B equals A.toUpperCase, and then you say string C equals A.toLowerCase, of course here we would expect A, but with all the letters capitalized. With C, we would expect all the letters of A, but with all of them lowercase. So it would be, you know, big Austin, and then it would be little Austin. And so then in order to see those things get printed, you just have to print them. So you'd say system.out.println of B and system.out.println of C. And those are the two things that we would get. There's going to be three more methods to talk about in this video, and then we'll pick it up in the next video. The next one I want to tell you about is the toString method. The toString method does nothing at all. It literally returns the string itself. So the toString method is a cool method in Java, and it actually has an interesting interpretation in a general sense. But for a string object, you can guess that the toString method is actually not very eventful. So if you say something like string W equals tree, and then you say string Z equals W dot toString, okay, and then you say system.out.println of Z, this just prints tree, okay? So calling the toString method on a string object returns the string object. There's really not too much to say about it. Don't overthink it. The last two that we'll talk about are the equals method and the equalsIgnoreCase method. These are two methods that return true if the characters of two strings being compared are the same, but one of them is case sensitive and the other one is not. So if you go ahead and say string S1 equals butterfly with a capital B, and then you say string S2 equals but, okay, with two capital T's, and then you see S2 equals S2 plus fly, okay, and you can see there's a weird combination of lowercase and uppercase letters. So you can say, okay, butterfly, butterfly, yeah, these strings are sort of the same, but not exactly the same. So if you say system.out.println of S1.equals of S2, this returns false because, you know, capital B is not the same as B, okay? But if you say system.out.println of S1 equals IgnoreCase of S2, this would return true, you know, because they both have BUTTERFLY in that order and no other letters. So no case insensitive. Same letters technically, so true. Okay, so that's what we would get here. So we would expect false on the first line and true on the second line. So that's what we would get here. So at this point, so let's review the string methods that we've talked about. So string objects, so they represent letters, sentences, words. So, you know, we've already printed strings before, but now in this video, we're just assigning them to variables and calling methods on them, calling operations on them. So remember, we're talking about concatenation. So either plus or with the concat method, and this combines strings. We talked about the length method, which gives returns the number of characters, an int representing the number of characters in a string, including spaces. So if you had spaces, then that contributes to the length. And then we also talked about the isEmpty, so that just returns true if the length is 0, false otherwise. We talked about the toUpperCase and the toLowerCase methods, and so those just convert all of it just returns another string where all the letters are converted to either uppercase or lowercase, depending on which of those two methods you called. We also have the equals method, which is a case-sensitive comparison of the two sets of characters. And then we have equalsIgnoreCase, which is a case-insensitive comparison of the two sets of characters. So be familiar with those methods, be familiar with what string objects are, why we apply methods to them, and I'll see you in the next video where we talk about 6 to 8 new string methods and continue with our understanding and our exploration of the Java curriculum. From UMills03, thanks for watching and please subscribe.